Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Ladies Study Group Kolkata, I welcome you all to our very special inaugural session with remarkable guest Nirupama Rao. My aspiration for the year is that we have the adaptability to meet the new challenges with agility and ingenuity. As we strive together for a healthier, more inclusive, and compassionate world, we believe it is not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive the present myriad challenges, but those who are better at adapting to and managing these trying times. We begin with a compelling conversation between former diplomat and now the founder of South Asian Symphony Orchestra, Mrs. Nirupama Rao, and our much loved corporate public relations icon, Rita Bhimani. In her role as a diplomat, Nirupama Rao devoted herself to solving complex challenges and finding common ground. Therefore, as our esteemed speaker, she epitomizes this year's theme, adaptability. May I invite Nirupama Rao onto the screen, please? Welcome, Nirupama, to Ladies Study Group, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. A retired Indian diplomat, foreign secretary, and ambassador, Mrs. Nirupama Rao joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1973. During her 4-decade-long diplomatic career, she had several important assignments. She was India's first women spokesperson in the Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi, the first women High Commissioner from her country to Sri Lanka, and the first Indian women ambassador to the People's Republic of China. She served as India's Foreign Secretary from 2009 to 2011, the second Indian lady in this position. At the end of the term, she was appointed India's ambassador to the United States of America, where she served for a term of 2 years from 2011 to 2013. Not many are aware that even while she was trying to secure India's interest, Nirupama Rao tried to continue to hone skills of a completely different kind, singing and playing a guitar. And after completing her term as India's ambassador in the US in late 2013, she returned to her singing. In 2018, Mrs. Rao and her husband Sudhakar set up a Bangalore-based trust called the South Asian Symphony Foundation with the objective of furthering peace in South Asia and beyond. Sudhakar, former Chief Secretary, Karnataka, one of my most successful batchmates from Delhi School of Economics. Nirupama's first commercial album, titled Peace is My Dream, was released in 2017, and her book of poems, Rain Rising, was published earlier in 2004 to great acclaim. Thank you, Nirupama, for being with us today. May I have Rita onto the screen, please? Welcome and thank you so much for joining us, Rita.
Thank you.
Rita Bhimani is an iconic figure in the profession of corporate public relations. She has spent several decades writing, speaking, and teaching the subject. A master's in journalism from USA. Rita runs her own PR consultancy firm, is a versatile columnist, a teacher of media studies, and author of 5 books. In keeping with our theme, we are also pleased to mention her musical proclivities, As she has authored a book on the 100 years of the Calcutta School of Music, are passionate about Western classical music and still continues her piano. And most significant to this interaction, especially attended Ambassador Rao's South Asian Symphony Orchestra peace concert in Bangalore to write about it. She epitomizes another of our themes, ingenuity, in a new prescriptive book to be published shortly. Rita, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Shumita, and congratulations once again for taking over as the president of the Ladies Study Group. I would now like to request a video to be shown of the South Asian Symphony Orchestra, something that I saw and experienced. We'd love to share a lot of it with you, but today we'll just do about 3 minutes of it. But let it be a surprise. Just see it first, and then we will have Nirupama Rao talk about it. So let's have the video. Thank you so much for that wonderful video. I think the South Asian Symphony Orchestra epitomizes the best of cultural diplomacy, I would say. This is the best way that Nirupama Rao could take forward what she has done for 40 years as a diplomat. What you saw was the Bollywood tunes that were put together as a surprise element right at the end. And that's just part of the quiver of arrows of what is a much larger part of the repertoire that the orchestra has. Everything from Indian classical to folk, and a lot of Western classical. What was played in Bangalore when I went there was some superb Beethoven as well. There was a mix of everything. But what I'd like you to hear from Nirupama Rao is how she brought this whole concept into play. The fact that you could have a South Asian symphony orchestra, which is not just what we think of as South Asian, but it involves Kazakhstan, it involves Afghanistan, it involves the diaspora of Indians from so many other countries. And they've all come together to play. It's quite incredible, especially the stories of people who've come from Afghanistan. I'd love for you to share all that with us, Nirupama. So over to Nirupama Rao, Ambassador Nirupama Rao. Please, let's hear it from you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rita. It's wonderful to be sharing this platform with you today. I also wanted to add my congratulations, warmest congratulations to Sumita on her taking over as the helmswoman for the Ladies Study Group, an organization with which I've had a long association, in fact, going back to 1985, when the Ladies Study Group undertook its first trip to the People's Republic of China. It was their first trip to China, and I was instrumental in my own small way in facilitating that trip. And in fact, before the trip, if I am not mistaken, the delegation, the group called on the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, and I was privileged to accompany them to that meeting. And I believe the Ladies Study Group website still has a picture of that meeting. We're all looking so much younger. It's difficult to believe that it's the same. I'm the same person when I look at that photograph. Coming back to your question, Rita, and first of all, thank you so much for your support and your enthusiasm and encouragement for the South Asian Symphony Orchestra project. We haven't had any concerts after the Peace Notes concert of October 2019 in Bangalore, and all of you can guess why. It's because of the pandemic. But we have started a newsletter called The Accord, and it's on Substack, this new platform called Substack, and I would recommend all of you to subscribe to it. I will send the link to Sumita, so all of you can take a look at it. Recently, in fact, the World Bank in Washington featured the South Asian Symphony Orchestra as an example of good neighborly behavior in South Asia, because this is exactly what our region needs. We have a lot of political boundaries and barriers and obstacles between us. We have not learned to think in an integrated, interconnected way among ourselves. We are people who share so much in terms of a civilizational heritage. Our histories are common, our ethnicities are common, our languages are common, our religions are common. I mean, I could go on with this list of common ground, even though we have these political boundaries between us. South Asia is really an integer, to use a mathematical term. Earlier, we called it the subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent. Sometimes people say we're not just a subcontinent, we're really a continent. We're the continent of, I think it was called Pangaea, which broke off, and this section, Gondwana land, hit the Tibetan plateau and created the Himalayas. And that is really what South Asia is, from Afghanistan to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, including Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Bhutan. So we're all in this together. We share a common destiny, and we rise together. And you know, anything that happens which is bad for one part of the region affects the other. When it's look at climate change, look at natural disasters. The whole humanitarian question of how we elevate the lives of people, improve development, advance development, eradicate poverty. I think this is what we, particularly as women, women who are so sensitive to the needs of our fellow human beings, it's in our DNA. We are brought up that way. And I felt, therefore, when we started this project of the South Asian Symphony Foundation, incidentally, we complete 3 years. It's our birthday on the 9th of July. We complete 3 years. So this event is so felicitous in that sense because it coincides with that anniversary. So when I started this project, I wanted to bring young people of this region together through the medium of music. And why did I choose a symphony orchestra? Because symphony orchestras teach us the art of listening to each other. They, you sit side by side with somebody and make music. You are compelled to discipline yourself so that you are part of one venture, part of one project. Because if you play out of tune, then the whole orchestra is out of tune. So the concept of an orchestra appealed very much to me. And I wanted to graft onto that concept our own indigenous folk traditions, our musical offerings that we have, so rich, so textured, and so vivid. So this, in a way, is an integrative project, not just a Western music project, but it's a project that is about music as a definition of the human spirit.
Why it is so unique, the whole South Asian Symphony Orchestra, is because I don't think there's anything ever been like it in this region, and there never will be, because of the way you have conceived it and the inclusivity of the kind of musicians, which I'd like you to bring some of one or two of the stories forward. There was a precedent, let us say, when the West Eastern Orchestra was conceived by Daniel Barenboim, if I can remember right, and Edward Said. I think it grew really more out of conflict. And the musicians who were playing were really at war with one another, if I might say so. But then they came together for this same thing, to make peace. And they made some wonderful music. But what you have done is actually grouted the whole thing in peace itself. You have started from that point, and now you're growing it. So I'd like you to talk more about it.
Yes, Rita, you're right that the East Western Divan Orchestra, which is an orchestra of Israelis and Palestinians, and which was founded by Edward Said and Daniel Barenboim, was in some ways an inspiration for my project, although our region is so much more, it's very different in many, many ways. I don't want to go into the whole length and breadth of it. And also, just to, Israelis and Palestinians, even if they're divided, there is a tradition of Western music orchestras in that region. Young people learn Western musical instruments. So you started with a base, I think, that was already quite well developed, even if you
Yes.
had conflict and you had difference. In the case of our region, first of all, history and tradition hasn't enabled that kind of exposure. And I'm not saying that's a disadvantage. I think we come to it with our own unique identity as a result. But we do have group music playing. We have, of course, the concept of bands, the military bands in our region, some of which play beautiful music. And it's my dream that at some stage the South Asian Symphony Foundation should, as one of its projects, start and develop a project on the military bands of South Asia and the music that they play, because they take the folk music of the region and musicalize it for their performances. And I think it'd be wonderful to bring together the music of various countries played by military bands, in fact, not in a sense of a call to war, not a clarion call to conflict, but a clarion call for peace and integration. I'd like to do that. In fact, the Western Naval Command musicians participated in our first concert in Mumbai in April 2019. And in fact, at the Bangalore concert, which you attended, the United States Coast Guard deputed to us one of their musicians of Indian origin, Indian American, Meera Gudipati. She's a wonderful flautist, a flute player, and she played in the concert in her United States
Yes.
Coast Guard uniform, if you
Yes,
remember, just as our
I
boys
do.
from the Western Naval Command in Mumbai played in their uniforms at the Mumbai concert. So I am so encouraged by the fact that this idea of the South Asian Symphony Orchestra is taking root and has been greeted with so much positivity throughout the region. Everybody who has heard about it has been positive about it. Nobody has asked me, why are you doing this? I mean, is there any need for you to do this? Nobody has questioned it. In fact, the Vice President of India, Sri Venkaya Naidu, he was the guest, the chief guest, the guest of
Yes.
honor at our first concert in Mumbai. So that's the way this project has been greeted. So I'm very enthused and encouraged and thrilled about the fact that this has taken off. And once the pandemic is over, we'll be able to develop it further. Talking about musicians in the orchestra, I'd like to mention particularly about I call them the little ones from Afghanistan. They're really little. The youngest member of our orchestra was a 13-year-old from Kabul, Afghanistan. His name was Ali Sina. You've heard of the Islamic scholar Avicenna. You must have heard if you read, those who read history know about him. He was a very, very famous scholar. So Alicina is named after him. And he was a wonderful little violin player. We have another young violinist, very talented, called Amanullah Noori, who says he wants to be the Paganini of South Asia. In fact, that's how his Facebook name is Amanullah Nicolo, Nicolo being the first name of Paganini. And then we have another young pianist who is also a member of the orchestra, who has composed, who's from Afghanistan, who has composed a lot of music based on what he sees around him, the terrorism, the violence, and a young, sensitive soul reacting to these tragedies around him. Music has become some kind of a panacea, an antidote, a refuge for these young people. And I really am concerned that with the changes that are underway in Afghanistan and with the likelihood of the Taliban returning to a position of power and command, I really hope that the future of these young people who are so open to the world, who are so welcoming of ideas from outside, is secured, is assured, because we all would be losers, I believe, if the people of Afghanistan lose out on their future.
Yes, actually, the kind of encouragement that you have given them, and you've given them a platform to come and play and to grow. I think that is, again, a great step forward in this whole idea of your bringing people together, of the inclusivity, of the peace in the region, which you are seeking and conveying through music. And I must say about this young musician you talked about, I had interviewed him at the time when I was in Bangalore, and he talked about how initially he had never ever seen a piano in his life.
Yes. His name is Arsan Fahim.
Our son Fahim, our son, and look how he went on to actually become such a wonderful pianist and a composer. And then there's this other, you were talking about women and how you want to encourage women. There's this all woman orchestra in Afghanistan, the Zora
That's right.
band. And in spite of all the problems with the Taliban around them, they still continue to be an orchestra. How did that happen? How did you manage to get some of them over to play?
Yes, some of the girls from that orchestra performed in our first concert in Mumbai, in fact. And they were just wonderful. They were interviewed by the media in Mumbai, and they were quite a sensation. And it just opened our eyes also about Afghanistan. We, in India, perhaps we tend to, not know very much about neighbors like Afghanistan. We've, of course, seen movies and heard stories like Kabuliwala, and there is a certain image in our minds about what Afghans look like and sound like. But when you really meet these young people in person and get to hear them talk about their dreams, about their aspirations, like you mentioned, Arsan. And I'm very happy to tell you that Arsan has got admission to a music conservatory in Boston, in Massachusetts. And the last I heard from him, he was applying for his visa, a student visa from the American Embassy. And he is planning to wing his way now to America to continue his music studies. But many others are not as fortunate as him. So I was just worried and concerned about the youngsters, members of our orchestra in Kabul. And I do hope they get to pursue their dreams, to chase their dreams, and to fulfill them. But there is, I must confess, a question mark today because we really don't know what the future holds.
But you have many in the orchestra who are also people from Kazakhstan, for instance. And this is so surprising, who are teaching in India, in other places, in Chennai. That's incredible that you've encouraged them.
That's right. We had a couple of them from Kazakhstan, people who were based in India. They came in for the second concert, the one you had. But what I'd like to really highlight about our orchestra is that we have defined the concept of South Asia and of India to really embrace the whole idea of South Asianness. And that idea of South Asianness extends beyond the confines of geographical South Asia to include the diaspora of Indian and South Asian origin scattered all across the world. And that's why we had members in the orchestra coming from the United States, from the United Kingdom, and from Singapore, actually. We had a lot of people from Singapore, people of Indian origin, who had joined the orchestra. And in fact, our conductor, our orchestral director, was Alvin Arumugam, who is from Singapore for our second concert. And his ancestry is interesting. You know, he's Tamil speaking, but of Sri Lankan origin, and his ancestors migrated to Singapore. And then that's how he came to our South Asian Symphony Orchestra. So I have really tried to emphasize and put out there this idea of connectivity and integration and respect for diversity. I think that is exceedingly crucial for us at this stage, because all over the world, I think there is an emphasis on hyper-nationalism, let us put it that way. I'm not saying nationalism is a bad thing. Patriotism is a great thing to possess, for instance. We're all would like to count ourselves as patriots, as Indian patriots, which we are in every sense of the word. But that idea should also include this willingness to embrace otherness, embrace diversity. And India, as the largest country in the region, should be prepared to elucidate that concept, you know, that we are here in a region that is so interconnected and that we need that integration if we are to prosper. You know, look at the idea of Europe that was created out of a region that was at constant war with each other. If you went back a century and a half, look at Germany, look at England, look at France. And today, where do you see the fields of Flanders are truly covered with poppies and flowers and beautiful things today. They're not battlefields anymore. So that is really my dream also. We can do it here. Our history has taught us this. There was nothing, if you looked at the Indian Ocean in the old days, it was a sea of trade, it was a sea of migration, of mercantile traffic, of the exchange of ideas. That's what our region should also become. So looking beyond music, I want to, because of my training in diplomacy, I'd like for our geopolitics to be defined by this kind of consciousness also. This idea that peace is not waving the white flag of surrender. Peace is about integration. And peace leads to development. Peace leads to better tomorrows for us.
Talking about peace, talking about diplomacy, I think we really would like to focus a little on some of the areas which where you have played a very significant role in some of the countries. And I'd like to start by focusing on China, because in fact, before we started this conversation, we got a lot of uh, questions from members, and they're a very enlightened lot. And most of them were very interested in knowing how you intend to take the Indo-Chinese relationship forward, what you intend to do, because you yourself have just finished writing a book on India and China, which I think will probably be published by the year end, if your publishers do a quick job of editing and everything else. But you know, when you were, if you can share something about when you were India's ambassador to China, at that time, what are the things you did? I know there was a lot of cultural diplomacy, of course, that is there. I think I'd like you to talk about that as well. But uh, uh, you know, you did, I think, try to revitalize Sino-Indian ties in so many ways.
Well, the first point I'd like to make about our relationship with China is that it is a very complex, a difficult, and in some senses a convoluted relationship. The
Mm.
second point is that China is our largest neighbor and that we share a frontier, a border of almost 4,000 kilometers with China. So we cannot row a boat away from each other. We are, created thus
Mm.
by geography, and we have to learn to deal with each other. The third point is that we had a tradition of emphasizing peaceful coexistence between India and China, but all that broke down in the late 1950s, early 1960s. As you know, there was a conflict between India and China in 1962 over the question of the
Mm.
border. And the question of the border is not as simple as it would seem on a
Mm.
map. I would say it is a territorial question also, because we have claims in Ladakh, in territory that is currently held by China, which is a huge chunk of territory in the Aksai Chin area of Ladakh. And they claim what is our Arunachal Pradesh, most of our Arunachal Pradesh. That's
Mm.
another huge chunk of territory. So these are territorial questions. These are not just border questions. It's not just, I drew a line here, you drew a line here. So let's reconcile where those lines should be. It's not as simple as that. There are territorial questions between us. Fourthly, 30 years ago, I mentioned Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. He went to China and we tried to craft a modus vivendi, a manner of
Yes.
coexisting
Yes.
between two
Mm.
countries, where we said we will talk about all the issues in the relationship, not just about the border. We will try to improve relations in all areas while we continue to make efforts to resolve this question between us, the border question between us. And that's what we tried to do. And we did maintain peace along the border. There was no violence, there was no bloodshed.
Mm.
And we developed relations in all other areas. China became, one of our largest trading partners. And there was a huge
Yes.
amount of traffic between the two countries. But last year in Galwan, in Ladakh, exactly a
Mm.
year ago, there was an armed a confrontation, a military to military confrontation, and we lost the precious lives of 21 of our soldiers, including the commanding officer. And the Chinese never really released statistics of how many
No.
people they lost.
No.
But many months later, they claimed that they had lost 4 soldiers. But who knows? Because they don't ever follow a method of transparency in such matters, unlike in India, where we are an open society and we are a constitutional democracy. So once the clash in Galwan happened, I think the whole edifice of relations that we had built up between our two countries really came tumbling down. And today we're in a situation where it seems that tensions between the two countries have not abated. The unresolved questions on the boundary between us, the line of actual control between us, remain unresolved. And India is insisting that China must restore the status quo on this line and go back because China, from our point of view, has intruded into our side of the line of actual control. But not much has happened. Lots of efforts have been expended by the military commanders of both sides to meet, and hour upon hour of discussion has taken place, but the situation has not returned to normal as yet. So we are in many ways at an inflection point, at a turning point in the relationship that is really a cause for concern, and in many ways causes India to recalibrate and to recalculate and to reassess what the directions of our foreign policy should be. Should we get closer to the United States? We are not a country that enters into alliances with other countries, but our partnership with the United States, our coalitions of the willing, as we call it, with like-minded democracies, those are being strengthened, and therefore you have a stronger interaction and relations and cooperation with countries like the United States, with Japan, with Australia, what we call the Quad, and also with other countries in Southeast Asia. Which is dealing with a very muscular, very assertive, I would say an expansionist China. And as somebody said, China is an autistic power. I think it suffers from great power autism. I think it refuses to see and look around itself to understand the impact this assertiveness and this expansionism is making. The whole of Asia is concerned, and the rest of the world too.
So in your book, what have you finally, I can't say what have you concluded, but there must be a point at which you've, what you've said now, you have also talked about exactly what, this whole autistic expansionism and, their temperament at doing what they're doing, their hegemonistic temperament.
Actually, my book, Rita, is a history. It's a diplomatic history of the period from 1949 to 1962.
Yes.
Like they say in Western, tradition, the world was created in 7 days, or on the 8th day God did this. So in many ways, the relationship between India and China, as we see it today, was formed during those years.
Yes.
From 1949 to 1962. All the complications and the complexities that you see in the relationship today, the gestation period was really those 13 years from 1949 to 1962. And
so we have to look at it as a historic certainty, that part of it.
My idea was that this younger generation, the millennials as we call them, were not around at that time, who have, in a sense, this is a legacy issue for them, a legacy problem, which they will be called upon to deal, I'm sure, when they reach, positions of responsibility and leadership in the years to come. So I felt that it would be my duty, my responsibility as somebody who had, known this history. Even if I joined the Foreign Service after 1962, I had studied this history. I wanted to be able to recount this for a younger generation, to tell the story, as it were, to show it as a moving picture, to talk about the personalities involved, to talk about the people. I have in my book is called "Tell It on the Mountain: India, Tibet, China, 1949 to 1962." So I've included the story of Tibet also in that.
Tibet, yes.
Because I think that is very intrinsic to our understanding of the complexities in the relationship between India and China. So I hope it will be appreciated by those who read it. And I hope my idea was to inform, uh, to enlighten, maybe that is a hubristic word, but at least to get people to understand and to awaken an interest in this subject. Because I think for every Indian, there is need to study China very closely. Not only because it's a neighbor, but it's also a country with which we are compared constantly. Although today, there is a great asymmetry of power between our two countries. I mean, you have China, which has a GDP which is which is 5 times larger than ours today. And I
Yes.
remember Rajiv Gandhi went to China in 1988. Their GDP and our GDP was almost the same. You know, we were
My
at the
goodness.
same level, and in 30 years we
Mm.
so I think people in India should understand also that there is a history to this relationship. And if, you know, when you hear of news of an intrusion by China here or there, the Ladakh problem, there's a history to all this. And I think people should understand that history because those who do not understand history are often condemned to repeat it, as the saying goes. So I think that awareness, that interest, that knowledge of history is so important. And that was the purpose of my book, as it were.
Right. And then I take you to your tenure as Foreign Secretary, when you were very active in handling India's relations with its neighbors, with the United States. I'll come to that in a moment because you were ambassador to the United States. So your relations with USA, Russia, Japan, all the multilateral issues that you tackled, the issues including nuclear energy cooperation, you brought in climate change and so on. So that was a very, very important stage also in your career as Foreign Secretary. And later, as a spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs, there was a lot that happened. Particularly, I think I would like to bring up the Agra summit, which we would like to forget also. But there it is, there it was. Because I think as spokesperson, you actually faced the electronic and the print media quite a bit, which is unusual. We normally have governments backtracking or not talking enough about it in a transparent manner. But you actually came forward and shared a lot of information. I think because you did that, this practice has been institutionalized. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, yes, absolutely. When I became the spokesperson, we were just getting into 24/7 television, and the whole scene was changing. And I felt that we needed to establish channels of communication that were open, that were fluid, that were approachable, that were accessible for the media, because it is so easy in this world of lights, camera, action 24/7. It's so easy for stereotypes to take root, for false news to be disseminated. And there's always need for us to set the compass, especially those of us who have the knowledge, who have the correct information, and who are concerned about the welfare of our societies, who are concerned about peace and order, and who are concerned about people forming the right opinions, correct opinions, correct opinions. I will not use the word right, but correct opinions. And that was the rationale behind my desire to go out there, to face the cameras, to answer questions, and ultimately to signal to the outside world that India has the conviction and the confidence to speak
Yes.
about these, to defend our positions, and to persuade audiences about the validity of the positions we take. So that really was the purpose, and so I institutionalized live briefings. The transcript of every briefing would go up on the website by the next day so people could access it. So there was no room for ambiguity and for misinterpretation. So that then became a practice that everybody followed after I ceased to be spokesperson. And I
Yes,
also
but there was something else you did, I think, and that was more than 10 years ago. when you actually took to social media. That was so unusual. We talk about it today. But look at the Twitter account that you had and look at the followers. I'd like you to tell us how many followers you have today. But you used Twitter in a very proactive manner, let us say. So just tell us a little about it.
Yeah, I was, quite fascinated by Twitter for quite many years before I joined it. I'd first heard about Twitter during the 26/11 tragedy in Mumbai and how,
Mm,
hostages and people, the unfortunate people holed up in the Taj Mahal Hotel were using
mm,
Twitter to communicate to the outside world. And that got
mm,
me thinking about, the use of Twitter in times of crises, in terms of emergencies, in times of situations like that. And then when the Libya crisis
yes,
unfolded in the summer of
yes.
2000, and there were lots of our Indians stranded there. All
Mm,
across, it's a big country, and communications were breaking down. And I saw that Twitter was one medium through which they were still able to put out messages, and we were able
mm,
to reach people even if other communications had broken down. And therefore, I said, let me take the plunge and open a Twitter account, and I will use that Twitter account to communicate with these people in need. And that's how I entered the world of Twitter. And I've stayed on Twitter, and I use it as a medium to communicate news of interest, to talk about diplomacy, to talk about foreign policy. If I have
mm,
written
mm.
something, to be able to convey it to the outside world. So today I have 1.3 million followers on Twitter.
That's
So
fabulous.
so
That's
that's by following, and I use it with a lot of sense of responsibility. I know that these are not
mm,
platforms
yeah.
to be used
Mm,
carelessly, and I suppose that one's training as a civil servant induces a sense of caution and circumspection in what you do, and
yes.
that's not
Mm,
native to me. I think it would be native to anybody
mm,
who has served in
mm,
government or has been a civil
mm.
servant.
But your life as a diplomat. Now we think of diplomacy and diplomats going around the world and whining and dining and issuing joint statements and things like that. But I think your kind of diplomacy was much more in the trenches, let us say, because if we look at what you did in Sri Lanka, what you were in Peru, and some of these countries I mentioned because there was a lot of troubleshooting in all those places. So you might like to mention that life of a diplomat actually is a little different from what our preconceived notions are.
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. They say about diplomacy that ambassadors or diplomats approach everything with an open mouth. I think that is so true. We do approach everything with an open mouth. And sometimes we get into situations from which perhaps our ability to articulate and to express ourselves is a way, is an instrument, is a weapon, is a tool. But talking about my experiences, yes, in Sri Lanka, I did two postings in Sri Lanka, very
Hmm.
eventful postings. And the first one was as a young diplomat, and I was there when the ethnic riots of 1983 broke out, and that was again an
Hmm.
inflection point. The civil war, as you know, between the Tamil minority and the Sinhalese majority erupted soon after that. So I was witness to some very horrendous events during those riots of 1983. And I worked out of refugee camps to help people in need, and lots of people needed help, needed to be sent to India. In fact, a lot of Tamils of Indian origin had also been affected. And then in Peru, I was at the Japanese ambassador's residence for a reception to celebrate the Japanese emperor's birthday. And I had left the reception just 2 minutes, 3 minutes before the embassy was attacked by a group of terrorists, and everybody in that reception was taken hostage. So it was like a great escape, really. I left just in the nick of time. Otherwise, I would have also been taken hostage. And that event, that incident took 4 months to resolve, in fact, if you're aware. If you were to go onto the web and Google it, the Japanese embassy hostage taking of December 1996, a very historic event in Peru. I think people remember it even to this day. I was in Peru those days. I was in Sri Lanka again when the tsunami of 2004 happened, to the Boxing Day tsunami, and I was involved very closely with the relief and rehabilitation operations that India launched to help Sri Lanka after that. So that gave me an opportunity to travel into the interior of Sri Lanka, even into the northern parts of the country, which had been affected by the civil war. And I was the first Indian diplomat to go there after a very long period, actually, because that area was closed. And that again was quite a revelation, quite an experience to go into those war-torn areas. In China, of course, every
In
event in
China, during the Sichuan earthquake,
China,
again,
during the
you
Sichuan
went out there. Yes.
I was there during the Sichuan earthquake and was able to visit the earthquake affected areas. India also delivered assistance to China at that time. And one of the experiences that does stand out is my visit to Tunhuang on the Silk Route, in fact, with the Buddhist murals of Tunhuang, which remind you so much of Ajanta, the connections between India and China. Today, we never talk of India-China friendship. It's not a very in word today, but there is a history of interaction between our two countries through Buddhism, through the pilgrims that were exchanged between the two countries, and the kind of civilizational, cultural give and take that happened between the two countries. There's so many words in each of our languages that are borrowed from each other, for instance. And there is history. In fact, in Chinese belief and philosophy, which was very, very influenced by Buddhist philosophy, as you know, India, they call it Yindu in Chinese. It was really the country to the west, the Middle Kingdom. What they call today, they call China the Middle Kingdom. India was the middle country for them because India was the country you encountered always when you went west. And India was the seat of Buddhism, of religious thought, of philosophy, of culture. So, there was a respect also. The Qing Emperor, Qianlong Emperor in the late 18th century, composed 24 poems in Chinese about Indian jade. Jade is a material. In fact, I wear a jade bangle constantly because in China they say it gives you strength. Chinese women say that, and I think we women are sisters, regardless of whichever country we belong to. So the Chinese emperor was so impressed by the quality of Mughal jade. Jade was mined in the Kunlun Mountains in China, but sent to India to be worked by our craftsmen. And it was so beautifully treated and worked upon that it was like water, apparently, the transparency of that jade. So you have the Qianlong Emperor who looked down on almost every other part of the world, wax eloquent through 24 poems about Indian jade. So that's, deep down, I think there is this admiration, the sneaking admiration that a lot of Chinese feel for India. We Indians perhaps know less about China than perhaps the average Chinese knows about India. But today, all that I think is kind of, what shall I say, built over. It's like you have to dig so deep to find that affinity, because today it's all, I think the geopolitical color of every event has sort of politicized the everyday between the two countries.
We talk about, the cultural ties, and I think this is something that you did very positively when you were ambassador to the United States, particularly the cultural center. You were actually instrumental in getting the place for them. It's now become a fabulous cultural hub. So,
Yes, in
this is
fact,
something that you really achieved while you were there.
thank you for bringing that up. Culture is very important as diplomacy, and we shouldn't think of it as something that is only about soft power. It is an instrument that furthers your aim, your intention to make your country better understood, to make your country better admired, and better appreciated uh, to the audiences of the country in which you're posted. So in China, for instance, I started the Indian Cultural Center while I
Yes.
was in.
Hmm.
We rented a small place in central part of Beijing, and the kind of appreciation for our music, for our dance, for our yoga is tremendous. As also for our poetry. Do you know in the late 1950s when our then Vice President Radhakrishnan, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan visited China, the Chinese put up a 3 or 4 act play on Shakuntala. For they
Fabulous.
looked at Kalidasa's Shakuntala and staged it in Chinese for the visiting dignitary. So that's the kind of impact that our culture has. So in the United States, yes, I did acquire the building. We had been looking for a building for a long time, and Dr. Karan Singh, who was heading the ICCR at that time, pushed me. And I think it's very good when your bosses push you enough for you to
Yes.
really go out there and make sure that you achieve what is needed to be achieved. And we did buy the building. It's in the central part of Washington, in a very, very good part of Washington. And
Very
there,
upmarket area.
very
Yes.
upmarket area.
Yes.
And yes, you're right. This is a place. Washington is a place where you can do huge amounts of work in culture. Not, I don't just mean music and dance. I mean, book discussions. Take a historical topic, encourage people from various university campuses, the faculty, the specialists to come, become a magnet that draws all this talent together. So becoming an enabler, becoming an energizer. I think these are what you need to do, because it's the environment is ready to soak it in, and there are already experts within the environment. You need to become that enabler that brings everything together, that creates that synergy, so that you multiply that energy, that latent energy, many, many times over. So, you create this cascade of interest and involvement.
So you've created a huge amount of energy for all the listeners today. And we're coming almost to the end of our discussions. We've got only another 3 minutes left. So I think we may have to wind up. This is something that should become a series, Nirupama, because there's so much to learn from you, so much to gain from you. And maybe we'll have to do something another time in a different way. Now that we're in a locked world, we can unlock many other things, many other talents, which we can do through Zoom and so many other ways that we can do it. So I think I'd like to invite back Shumita to come back to us, and she might like to say a few words now.
Yes, that was such a beautiful performance by South Asian Symphony Orchestra. It was really fantastic. And I'd like to show that this is your long association dates back to 1984 as a young deputy secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. You assisted LSD's group visit to China, and you feature in the first photo on our website. You are from the second, from the left, and Rakhi Sarkar, Rakhi Di is there. And
Actually, I am
during
on the
her
far
presidency year, I think.
Yes,
Yes?
Sumita, I'm on the far right of the picture.
Okay, absolutely, yeah. There you are. And Rakhi Di is on the other extreme. Yes. So,
Yes, I do remember my friends Rakhi Sarkar and Neeta Bhagat very, very fondly, in fact, from those days.
okay, Neeta Bhagat was also informed. I don't know whether she is watching or not today. Now,
I
our
was
vice
actually
president.
looking at my phone to see whether some of the questions had come in. That's why I was looking down. Sorry about that. But I think the discussions were so stimulating that we wanted to, continue. So yes, you're just inviting the Vice President, Sucheta Mayor, to come on.
Yes,
To give a vote of
Sucheta
thanks.
will give the vote of thanks. Yes. Unmute, unmute, unmute.
Good evening and namaste to all. A big thank you, Nirupama ji, for your time today. It's been sheer pleasure hearing you. You have been one of the most distinguished diplomats who has dealt with a whole spectrum of complex issues, families like yours, where there has been an equal passion for both music and academics are truly remarkable in this day and age. You have been a champion in building the South Asian Symphony Orchestra, and it was really delightful to see it in the video. We are proud of you and look forward to your book being published. Also, your effective use of Twitter and social media have helped you communicate your views to many. I would like to conclude it's been an extremely informative session and been truly encouraging to hear about your journey. I wish you all the best.
Thank you
I
so
would
much.
like to thank Rita, members, online viewers, and the media for the support. Over to you, Sumita.
Thank you, Nirupama, for giving your time. We thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you all once again. Now there is an announcement for the members. Please join us on our next webinar on 2nd July at 4:30 p.m. Interaction between Mr. N.R. Narayan Murthy and Mr. Harshavardhan Neotia. So please join us in our next webinar. Thank you all once again. Thank you, Nirupama.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Sumita.